What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so recently Shaquille O'Neal had been in the news. He recently was dissed indirectly, at least by LeBron James in the Pat McAfee interview when LeBron indirectly referenced Charles Barkley and Shaq, talking about their guys in the media who do a bad job of analyzing the game, and also critique certain players for only dominating due to their physicality and athleticism. And then after that went away, they became basic. When I really think he's talking about Shaq and Charles, but that's not even really accurate when you really look at it, because Charles retired due to a career-ending injury. Shaq broke down due to injuries, but you could argue he didn't work on his body the way that he should have. But Charles was still putting up decent numbers on a broken down body. Matter of fact, I think in the '99 playoffs, I think it was the first round, I think the Lakers played Houston. I think Chuck averaged like 23 and 13 when he was 36 and broken down against that Shaq and Kobe Laker team. So I don't know about that with Charles Barkley. Anyway, Shaq recently has been critical of this era, saying that LeBron's longevity is really a byproduct of a soft era. So I just find the timing of this really interesting. That now all of a sudden, Shaq's defense comes up in question. I just find it interesting. Like he makes these attacks on, this era and on LeBron and some of these other guys, and now all of a sudden Shaq's defense wouldn't hold up in today's NBA. So anyway, this is what Danny Green said.
So Shaq's been on one. I don't know what's going on in his life, but he's been on something. So he said, if he played against Wemby and Chet, he would have made both of them quit. Are you buying that?
Well, Wemby does not seem like a kid that would ever quit on anything. Nope. But I understand when I'm recently retired. When you're one of those retired guys, I feel like Shaq is just one of those guys. He always has to prove or show or feel like people forget. So it's like, yo, you're going to respect me. I was one of those guys. So I feel like he always has to kind of show and tell, always prove that, if I played today, because people say, if you played today, this guy would dog, or Jokic is a more skilled player than you, or this person you wouldn't be able to guard. And yes, he would have bullied these guys. He would have been able to do that on the offensive end of the floor. But on the defensive end of the floor, Shaq would have had problems guarding these guys. There's no way he's stepping out. He was not even comfortable leaving the paint. To guard them on the perimeter, to guard them on a lone spot, and you can't teach 7'4". These kids are 7'3", 7'4". Shaq, you're not blocking those shots, those jump shots. And they would have given him a lot of hell on that floor. But on the offensive end of the floor for Shaq, yes, he could have been playing bully ball, but it's no different than Joel. We've seen what Joel did to Wemby his rookie year. So it's kind of similar to that. But Wemby's learned from that. He didn't quit against Joel. And Shaq and Joel aren't that much different in size when it came to playing. So if he's not quitting against Joel, he's not quitting against Shaq. Chet, I don't know how much he's played. I haven't seen him, match up with those guys in the post like that, but he's not a kid that's going to back down either. And it's at offensive end of the floor. You're gonna have your hands full guarding these two guys. So, but I understand Shaq feels these older generation guys feel disrespected sometimes when the conversation comes up that these kids can probably they have more skilled. Yes, maybe so. They can outdo maybe, but yeah, Shaq was the most dominant, and I think he just likes to reiterate that by throwing out these wild examples. So hey, I said he was one of those guys that could bully ball anybody in the paint, but he would have had some troubles guarding them on the other end of the floor.
I get annoyed by this more skill thing so much, man. What do you mean by that? Like, are you talking about perimeter skills? Shooting skills? Okay, maybe you have a point, but what about scoring in the paint skills? Center skills? Center-orientated skills? Boxing out, rebounding? Scoring with your back to the basket? Rim protection, shot blocking? proper footwork when playing defense in the paint. Like, these are skills. I don't understand why. It just goes to show you it's not enough representation of centers or former centers in the media. It just boggles my mind, man. But anyway, did Shaq have problems guarding more jump shooting or perimeter orientated big men? Yeah, because Shaq was a guy that scored that was in the paint. That was generally any center back then. That's one of the reasons he kind of struggled a little bit with Arvydas Sabonis. That's why he kind of struggled with Big Country Reeves. Any guy that was a jump shooter, and Shaq was kind of reluctant to come out of the paint, he would struggle a little bit with that, obviously. And that makes up much of what the NBA is today about. But what you got to understand, though, is Shaq was also a product of the game in which it was played when he was roaming the court, roaming the paint, and when he was dominating the game. Like, the people always talk about how Shaq was so big, and why do you think that was the case? Because the game was more paint orientated and center and big man orientated. That's what made Michael Jordan such a phenomenon and a bit of an anomaly, because, when he was doing his thing, you didn't really see guards. Yeah, you had the George Gervins and all that. You had guards dominate, but not dominate like he did, to the point where you could build a team around a shooting guard. That wasn't what the MO was for the first 40 to 50 years of the league. The consensus was you had to build around a center. And, look, Shaq took a lot of punishment. So that's why Shaq bulked up to 340, 350. Now, he got a little bit out of whack with his conditioning and relied too much on Kobe. But I tell you this, if we're talking about versions of Shaq, Orlando Shaq ain't going to struggle in today's league. The Shaq that weighed 300 pounds, matter of fact, when he was drafted 296, the Shaq that could run up and down the floor like a gazelle, the Shaq that was built like a bigger version of Dave Robinson, that Shaq, that Shaq gonna eat this league up, because he still had the speed and he still had the power and the brute force to dominate inside, but he also had more quickness. That Shaq would not struggle defensively. And even with that, Shaq had 2,800 career blocks? Didn't Shaq make a couple of all defensive second teams? So Shaq ain't no defensive slouch. Look, I said this before. If Nikola Jokic, who's a horrible defender, can dominate in today's NBA and be a bad defender, and nobody really question him about it, Shaq is not going to be some liability to the point where he's unplayable. That's bullshit, and that's poppycock. Okay? It is. That's poppycock and goddamn gobbledygook and any old term for bullshit that I can pull out of my ass. Okay? It is. Shaq would dominate in today's NBA. Now, I understand that defenses are more complex. There's a lot of switching. But the way the game is played, Shaq would probably be more physically more like his Orlando Magic self, because the game would necessitate it. One of the reasons Shaq got bigger was, like I said before, to compensate for the physical pounding he was getting in the paint. He said that on a number of occasions. So he put on more muscle, put on more weight. Yeah, of course, the Shaq that we saw in the last stage of his career with the Celtics, that Shaq wouldn't be able to play in today's league. But Orlando Magic Shaq, the early Lakers Shaq, Oh yeah, he's dominating. Period. He's dominating. Look, Joel Embiid ain't shutting nobody down in this league. And Joel Embiid is what? A couple of banquets away from 300 pounds? What are we talking about here? And Joel Embiid don't carry his 300 pounds like Shaq carried his 300 pounds. You see what I'm saying? Joel Embiid legitimately at times look like he has a big belly. But he's out there scoring 30 points. Now, Joel Embiid is a far better three-point shooter. I mean, it's laughable how much better outside shooter he is than Shaq. But Shaq would play bully ball. And I also believe that if Shaq was playing in today's NBA, he would have developed at least something of a jump shot. I'm not saying he would be Sam Perkins, but he would have developed something of a jump shot. And let's not forget that Giannis is not necessarily the greatest shooter, and Giannis is pretty much averaging 30 points a game the last, 3 years in the league? 3 to 4 years. So come on, man. Let's stop it with this nonsense. Stop this nonsense. That's all I got to say about it.